All right. So thanks for that introduction. Like they said, we're going to go through a little bit of an interactive session today. So we're going to be talking about understanding Bitcoin DeFi through writing and not code. So Bitcoin DeFi right now is one of the most exciting and interesting topics in the world of Bitcoin and Web3. It's actually one of the primary reasons why I first became interested in stacks. So I always like to anchor my dev work to a bigger why, and Bitcoin DeFi is definitely one of those things that seems like it's on the verge of revolutionizing one of the most important aspects of our lives, which is money. But how it actually works can sometimes be a little bit confusing. It's easy to grasp at a high level, like you can kind of comprehend in general what it is, but understanding the specifics of how it actually works and why it can be useful can be a little bit more difficult. So today we're going to talk about it from a relatively technical angle, how it works, what it's good for, a couple of use cases. And then, like I mentioned in the intro, I'm the developer advocate at the Stacks Foundation. I've been a developer for about 8 years, and I do a lot of writing in my job. And one thing I've noticed over the years is that the writing is the best way that I remember things. So a lot of the times when I'm trying to learn a new technology, what I'll actually do is I'll write a tutorial as I'm learning it, because there's just something about thinking through something and putting it down on paper that kind of helps you solidify that knowledge in your brain in a way that you otherwise wouldn't. So this talk is designed to be a little bit more interactive than other ones might be, and to kind of help everybody think through exactly what Bitcoin DeFi is, why it's useful, and then what some possible use cases are. So everybody has some worksheets that you can use to write your answers on. So we're going to go through and have you write your answers, and then we'll give everybody a minute or two to write their answers. Then we'll do some discussion, and we'll do that back and forth a few times. So for this particular talk, what we're going to cover is we're going to first start with just exactly what Bitcoin DeFi is, and then we're going to kind of go over Stacks' role in Bitcoin DeFi. How does it fit in? How does it enable it? And then finally, we'll go over a really exciting use case, a couple of different examples for how Bitcoin DeFi is currently being used. So before we get into that, just a really brief intro into who I am. My name's Kenny. I've been a full stack dev for about 8 years. I've been in Web3 world about 2 years. Right now, I'm working as the developer advocate for the Stacks Foundation. So what I do there is help developers basically get onboarded into the Stacks world, learn how to build stuff on Stacks so that we can actually get people building things that will help improve people's lives on Stacks, because as developers, that's ultimately our goal. So first thing I want to do here is I want us to just start off, before we talk about anything, I want everybody to just write down in your head right now, what is Bitcoin DeFi? So we're going to start off. Go ahead and briefly write down what you think Bitcoin DeFi is. I'll give everybody a minute or two to do that, and then we'll go over some answers and we'll kind of dive into talking about everything. Okay, cool. So hopefully everybody's had just a little bit of time to just kind of write down your initial impression on what Bitcoin DeFi actually is. I know we were originally planning on going around and hearing a couple people's answers. Is that still the plan? Not sure what that setup looks like on your end.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. Okay, who's feeling social today? Who wants to talk a little bit about Bitcoin DeFi and what they believe it is? Sir, what is your name?
Christopher Perceptions.
Christopher Perceptions. I wish that was my name. What do you think Bitcoin DeFi is?
Decentralized finance.
Here, speaking to this. Or we have a microphone.
Kenny, good to see you again, man.
Hey, man, how you doing?
Decentralized finance that solely exists on Bitcoin and expands Bitcoin.
Cool, I like it.
I like that a lot. Not only does it exist on Bitcoin, but it expands Bitcoin, a double threat. Who else? Who else we got here? And what is your name, and what do you think Bitcoin DeFi is?
I'm Bailey. Bitcoin DeFi bringing decentralized finance to the OG cryptocurrency of Bitcoin. So just more apps on top of a network that was created sort of as like a payments layer, but it didn't have a whole lot of the Ethereum smart contract apps on top of it. So adding that to Bitcoin.
Nice, love that, love that. Should we get one or two more here, Kenny?
Yeah, let's do one or two more.
Who else we got? This gentleman here.
Hi, Ken. It's Adam David Jones from Zier. I see that Bitcoin is a disruptor and DeFi is the innovator. The disruption allows a few people across the world to access it, but the innovation on that disruption is what allows everyone equal opportunity to access it.
Cool, awesome. I like that one a lot. Cool. Let's go in. I'm gonna jump over to the next slide, and I'll show you what I wrote down. I like all these. I agree with all these. So here's how I worded it: building the financial systems people currently benefit from, like loans and investments. Using Bitcoin as the underlying money, or the transactions and agreements are handled automatically with smart contract code instead of centralized intermediaries. And I think the big important piece of that, it was kind of highlighted in that last answer of this is kind of an essential layer to growing that Bitcoin adoption and getting Bitcoin out into the mainstream, is when people can use it for real life things like loans and investments. One of the use cases we're going to talk about at the end is kind of a first stab at doing this. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. But before we do that, let's go ahead and cover exactly how this works. So we'll go ahead and jump over to the next slide. And what DeFi really allows us to do is it allows us to create an entire economy using Bitcoin as the money. Now, technically that's possible right now, but it requires external trust. So it kind of just breaks that whole decentralization paradigm. So we can use Bitcoin for a lot of these financial systems, but it requires another chain with wrapped BTC, requires a centralized intermediary, something like that. And so what true Bitcoin DeFi would allow us to do is to send those on-chain Bitcoin transactions and then execute logic in a smart contract without that Bitcoin ever having to actually leave the Bitcoin chain. So that's the real goal here. And this is exactly what Stacks enables. So we jump over to the next slide. Stacks enables this. And this is what has really drawn me to Stacks in the first place. This is what I think is really exciting about it. So let's get a little bit more technical here. The way that this actually works is that Stacks smart contracts using the Clarity programming language, they actually have visibility into the state of the Bitcoin chain. And so what we can do is we can trigger certain things to happen in the Clarity smart contract on the Stacks chain based on certain Bitcoin transactions happening on the Bitcoin chain. And so that gets into a little bit more of the how of what we talked about earlier, where it expands the functionality of Bitcoin and it unlocks bigger use cases for it while still keeping Bitcoin the same foundational layer, keeping it what it's supposed to be, which is sound money. So one of the first projects, I think actually maybe the first project to really kind of build out a prototype of how this actually works, is called catamaran swaps. And so real quick, we are going to jump into how those actually work. We're just going to do a brief walkthrough, and then we're just going to look at a quick little Clarity code snippet so we can actually look and see the mechanics of how this stuff is actually working. So we'll go ahead and jump over one more slide, and then we'll just kind of walk through how these catamaran swaps work step by step. So as of now, there are some limitations on what transactions can be verified. I know a lot of this is being addressed with the Stacks 2.1 release, but this sort of prototype of Bitcoin DeFi demonstrates that what we're after, which is having Bitcoin transactions trigger smart contract logic, doing things based on certain inputs, and then having the Bitcoin itself never leave the chain, is actually possible. So first thing to keep in mind here is that the scenario here is, let's say that I want to swap some Stacks in exchange for some Bitcoin, but I want to do that trustlessly. The first concept to understand is that every Stacks address also has a corresponding Bitcoin address. So we'll jump over 2 slides and we'll start kind of going through this one by one. So that's kind of the base layer to keep in mind. So first step here, going over one more, the Stacks seller, which in this situation is me, I'll initiate a Stacks transaction with the Clarity smart contract. So I could initiate that directly. That might be through some sort of web UI, but I'm going to initiate a Stacks contract. And what that's going to do is that's going to deposit a specified amount of Stacks into an escrow account on chain. So that's on the Stacks chain. Let's say deposit 50 Stacks. That's going into an escrow smart contract on chain. Next one, along with this transaction, what I'll do is I'll pass some parameters. So what I'll pass in is the Bitcoin address that I want to receive my Bitcoin at, the amount of Bitcoin that I'm going to receive, and then a time limit until I cancel. So this escrow account, after a specified amount of time, if the Bitcoin transaction hasn't been verified, will just automatically return the sender Stacks. Next one over, what will happen is that transaction will then get processed. My Stacks will get deposited into that escrow. And then one more, next step, the seller of the Bitcoin, this is the person on the other end of the transaction that's selling the Bitcoin and buying the Stacks. What they're going to do is they're going to initiate a Bitcoin transaction to send me that specified amount of Bitcoin. Next step after that is that transaction info is going to be passed into the Clarity smart contract. And then at the same time, another Stacks transaction is going to be initiated to verify that that Bitcoin transaction is legitimate and has all the right information. And that's going to be done with Clarity's get block info function. So what this is going to be able to do is this is actually going to be able to look inside that Bitcoin transaction that was submitted and compare it to all the information that was passed in originally to make sure they all matched up. And then if they do match, then the Clarity smart contract can conclude that the transaction was included in the Bitcoin blockchain and that swap is actually processed. So that's how it works in a nutshell. We'll jump over to a little code snippet real quick. We're not going to go through this whole thing, but this is kind of where the magic happens for what we actually went through. This is the submit swap function inside the Clarity smart contract. And what I want to draw your attention to is we're passing in a bunch of variables that will basically set up the information that we need for the function to compare the expected Bitcoin transaction with the one that was actually found on the chain. And then down on line 13, you'll see this match function. And what this is doing is that match function is going to return the result of calling this Clarity Bitcoin library. And there's a function in there called was transaction mined. And that's going to take in this information that we're passing into our swap. And what that is going to do is that is actually going to do all of the work to compare the Bitcoin transaction on chain that was expected and see if it actually generates a result, which is what's down on the next line 14. And then what's going to happen after that is we're going to start a series of steps where we're first verifying that that result actually exists, verifies that it hasn't already been completed. If either of those things are true, then it's just going to abort and the swap's not going to happen. And then what we're going to do is we're going to check that the Bitcoin receiver that was specified with the initial stacks transaction from the beginning is actually the one that the Bitcoin's being sent to. If it's not, it errors out. And then we're going to check that the value is the same as what was specified. And then down on line 22 is where the actual stacks will get transferred. So if all of those things are true, so if the Bitcoin transaction was verified, if the receiver's correct, if the amount's correct, and if the transaction is successfully processed on chain, then we're going to call this stacks transfer function to transfer the specified amount of stacks over. So it gets released from the escrow account into the stacks buyer's account. And then that Bitcoin, after it verifies that the Bitcoin has been transferred to the correct receiver. So that was kind of a whirlwind high level view of how it all actually works. I'm going to be linking to all of this stuff. I have a resources page set up. So I highly encourage you to go and walk through this contract yourself, look at the Bitcoin library, because it's super interesting to dive into how that all works from technical level. So with all that being said, technical background, how to out of the way, let's jump into the next question of why is this useful? So I'll give everybody another minute or two to go ahead and write down their answer to this question, and then we'll talk about this a little bit more. All right, cool. Let's get a couple of people's answers to this one. So we kind of went through and talked about what it is. We talked about a little bit how it works. Now I kind of want to get into why is it actually useful? Why is this a good thing to have?
Used to go to the beach, or
No, but I'm going to try to get up.
All right, who would like to talk a little bit about why Bitcoin DeFi is useful?
yeah.
How about the bleachers up there? Anyone up the tables? I'm gonna start doing the substitute teacher, calling on people. Would you like to talk about how Bitcoin DeFi is useful?
Sure, it's Adam again. Well, I think I already sort of said it last time, and so everybody in the world has access to it. And maybe this is good or bad, but the dollar is no longer the world currency. The world currency is maintained by the people of the world.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And I'll step in too. I like answering questions. I think it's useful because of that reason. It's such a dominant currency, you know. Chuck E. Cheese tokens are really useful. You can play a lot of games with them. However, they're hyper-specific and only usable in a single location. Bitcoin is ubiquitous now. It would serve as a fantastic infrastructure for Bitcoin DeFi. Who else we got? Oh, back here. Yes.
So I'm just going to say DeFi on Bitcoin is useful because first, Bitcoin is the most secure blockchain currency and network, and because Bitcoin DeFi secured by the Bitcoin blockchain has that advantage, and it's decentralized, completely decentralized, and pretty much opens up innovative financial services to really anyone who has access to the net to the internet, and yeah, it's going to just decentralize financial services and in a securely. So
Cool.
Yeah, I love that.
Yep, I like all those. So what I put down as kind of the killer feature is it turns the world's soundest money into a productive asset. And this is something that I think is a key theme of the Stacks ecosystem in general. It's a key theme of this conference. And I think that oftentimes we don't really take the time to think about why that's important. So let's think about, we want Bitcoin to become this global reserve currency. And the people sitting in this room right now, the people at this conference, we understand from a technical level, from a philosophical level, why Bitcoin is important. But in order to really reach that mass of critical adoption, people need to see that it can actually be useful and do things in their own personal lives. And so they need to be able to see that it can do things like, can I get a business loan with it? Can I use it to get a mortgage? Can I generate a yield on it, which is what we'll be talking about here in a minute. We often get too hung up, I think, in the Bitcoin world and the Stacks world on the technical features of it, on the what can it actually do and why is it a good thing? But people that are not in this world and that aren't sort of early adopters in the same kind of sense that a lot of the people here today are, they're not necessarily going to be convinced by stuff. And so by that same stuff. And so Bitcoin DeFi and building products that are actually useful that can turn Bitcoin into a productive asset is a good way to sort of sell the benefits, but not the features of Bitcoin. But the important part, and this is kind of where our role as technical people comes in, is we need to make sure that that is built in a trustless and decentralized way. Like I was talking about earlier, you can do a lot of that stuff with Bitcoin right now. And somebody that's not in the weeds on why Bitcoin is really good and how decentralization works is not going to necessarily understand why having it be trustless and decentralized is so much better. So our job as kind of the technical people is to make sure that while we are building these useful things with Bitcoin, we're doing it in a truly decentralized and trustless way that does not compromise the decentralized nature of Bitcoin. And that's kind of where Stacks comes in. So Bitcoin is the sound money, and it's excellent at that, but it doesn't and shouldn't really do much else. And so people need these financial tools like loans and investments to sort of create an entire economy built on top of Bitcoin as the base money layer. So if you kind of do an analogy of Bitcoin to Stacks, Bitcoin is the foundational settlement layer, Stacks is the programming layer. Well, if you look at it from a monetary side, Bitcoin is the sound money and Stacks is kind of the economy that gets built on top of it that unlocks all that money and makes it productive. So we kind of talked about why it's useful from a high level. For the last question today, what I want to do is cover some potential use cases. So just write down really briefly, just one or two, if you can think of them, specific ways that something like this could be used in your life and somebody you know's life. And then we'll kind of go over a project that's a specific use case that's being worked on right now that I really like. So let's take a minute or two to go ahead and do that. I can kick this one off. One thing that I've been thinking about recently that I think would be really cool is to be able to just do basic things that many people need, like mortgages on uh, Bitcoin DeFi. I think something like that would be awesome. In a second, after we hear everybody else's answers, we're going to go over Zest Protocol, which I think is really cool. But before that, I want to hear just a couple of potential use cases that people think something like this, like Bitcoin DeFi, could be used for.
All right. Hard question because there's unlimited use cases, but I'd love to hear about some specifics people are cooking up. Ooh, right here.
Kenny, I'm just going to echo you. I would like to buy a home at the end of this year. And so I would just like a lot of my crypto, not just my Bitcoin, but all my altcoins or shitcoins, whatever they might be, to be used as, to be looked at as an asset that I have that I could take out a loan for. So, yeah.
Cool.
Love that. Crypto collateral. Who else we got? Who's got a crazy Bitcoin DeFi idea? Yeah.
This is Adam. I got a crazy one. So you buy life insurance and with the Clarity smart contract, and when your wearable device confirms that you are dead, it automatically pays out the benefactor. But if you decide, I don't really want life insurance, I broke up with my wife, then you could use NeoSwap to change your life insurance and get a different kind of insurance. Anyway, that's a little NeoSwap plug.
I like it.
Loved it, love it. Let me know if anyone needs me to be their crypto life insurance payout.
Yeah.
I will be that for you. You want one more, Kenny?
Yeah, let's do one more, and we'll jump in to talk about Zest a little bit.
Who do we got? Bitcoin DeFi. People don't want to give away their new idea. They're going to launch the project in a couple weeks here. All right, I think we could probably move on, Kenny.
All right, cool. So I want to jump into talking about one that's in progress right now called the Zest Protocol. And basically what the Zest Protocol is on-chain Bitcoin capital markets. And so it allows you to earn yield on your Bitcoin, but completely on-chain. So the coolest thing about this and kind of the killer feature is that it's a decentralized trustless lending protocol, and the creditworthiness of the borrowers is determined by a decentralized free market pool of delegates. And all of the actual creditworthiness determination, the lending, the borrowing itself, it all happens on-chain utilizing stacks and Clarity under the hood, but the users of the protocol don't really actually have to interact with anything but Bitcoin itself. And that's kind of the really cool thing, and really the end goal of Bitcoin DeFi is let's make it so that Bitcoin can do a bunch more stuff without modifying Bitcoin, and so that people don't really ever have to do much outside of the Bitcoin chain itself. And I do want to put out kind of a plug announcement. Zest is looking for somebody to help improve the catamaran swaps implementation, because that's the foundation of how this works. And so there's an open grant to work on this. So I'm going to link to that at the end. So if anybody that's a Clarity dev is interested in helping out on that, this is like a chance to help work on a huge foundational piece of the Bitcoin DeFi system. So I just want to read one thing from, this is actually from Zest's website, which I'll also link to. One more slide over is, so Zest is a fully on-chain solution for earning a yield on your Bitcoin. You'll go to our website or directly to smart contracts, pick a pool with a yield you like, and select for how long you want to lend. Then Zest will route your Bitcoin to an institutional borrower vetted by the pool delegate. That's that decentralized free market pool of delegates that we talked about a second ago. And then you'll receive the periodic interest payments in Bitcoin from the pool and receive your Bitcoin back by your chosen date. And this is the key part. All of that happens without interacting with any other chain than the Bitcoin blockchain. And so this is a perfect example of an actual real world use case that's currently being developed right now that's going to sort of unlock that productive asset that we were talking about before, getting those institutional borrowers involved, and then ultimately increasing adoption and usage of Bitcoin itself. So real quick, as we wrap this up, I just kind of want to wrap up by talking about a couple things. First thing is that I set up a resources page. So everything we talked about here today, Zest, catamaran swaps, the smart contracts that run it, you can find all those at stx.is/DeFi-Miami. So if you're interested in kind of diving into those smart contracts, seeing how all that works, you can do that there. And then I think something to take away from all this is that Bitcoin's at the very beginning stages of its adoption. And we're sort of we're the early adopters here. We're the people that really understand the value of Bitcoin. We kind of understand it from a technical perspective. We know why it's useful, but we should keep in mind that Bitcoin is a tool. It's not the end in itself. The purpose of Bitcoin is to improve people's quality of life. The goal is not to just hodl as much as possible and then die. That's not the ultimate goal of Bitcoin. It's supposed to be used to improve people's lives and used as a tool to actually do stuff with. So when done the right way, capital tools like loans and investments that we talked about today, they allow people to cooperate and perform these mutually beneficial actions that they wouldn't be able to do on their own. So like a small business loan, that benefits both parties. It benefits the small business owner because they're able to start up this business they might not have been able to before, and it benefits the lender because they get to make money on that transaction. When it's done right, that's mutually beneficial. And one of the, I think, best ways to do that right is to have it be completely decentralized and built on a sound money like Bitcoin. So we also need sound rails on which to actually run that economy. And that's where Stacks comes in. So as Stacks builders, it's our job to go out and build things that will allow people to take Bitcoin and actually use it to do productive things. So that being said, let's go out and let's use Stacks and let's build the world's soundest economy. Thanks for being here today.